You're tuned into the Spot-Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot-Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. Welcome back to another episode of the Spot-Up Pod. I hope everyone is having a great start to the new year, 2025. It has been quite a while since you last heard me here on the Spot-Up Pod, but thank you for tuning into another episode. I'm back for a whole new year of Spurs coverage here on the Spot-Up Pod. And so the last episode, episode 20, did come out way back on December 22nd, 2024. So what I want to do is I want to do a quick recap of the Spurs' last 7 games since that time to catch up with how the Spurs have been doing. I'm not going to go super detailed into the first few games because, it's been a while. It's been about 2 or 3 weeks. But I am going to focus on this week's past games, which were the games against the Clippers, the Nuggets, 2 times. So let's begin going all the way back to Monday, December 23rd. The Spurs are on the road. They're at Philly. Philly was favored by 5.5, and the Spurs did lose a close one there in Philly by 5 points. Then on Wednesday, the Spurs had an afternoon Christmas Day game in New York against the Knicks. The Knicks were favored by 8.5. The Spurs almost came up with the win. They lost by 3 points. Then on Friday, December 27th, the Spurs are on the road at Brooklyn. The Spurs were favored by 8. They were expected to win this game. They did win this game by 9 points. And then on Sunday, December 29th, the Spurs are on the road at Minnesota. The Wolves were favored by 6, and the Spurs barely lost that game as well by just 2 points. So again, those are the first 4 games of the 7 games that I want to review. Now let's go into this past week's games, beginning with Tuesday, December 31st, New Year's Eve. The Spurs are back at home hosting the Los Angeles Clippers. The Spurs were favored by 3.5, and they had their best win of the season, the blowout win. They won by 36 points. They really took care of business because the Clippers were on the second night of a back-to-back, and they were still missing a few rotation players. And so the Spurs basically led by 14, and then they never looked back. They really just took control of that game. Wemby had 27 points for the Spurs. Stephon Castle had 15 points, and then basically everyone that played minutes for the Spurs, all 15 players, did score in this game. Even Jeremy Sohan, despite him getting injured with the back injury, he still scored in the first half before he sustained that injury. Then on Friday, the Spurs are on the road at Denver, January 3rd. Denver was favored by 6, and the Spurs did come up with a very close 3-point win. So as an underdog, the Spurs were without Jeremy Sohan for this game with that back injury, and then the Nuggets were without Aaron Gordon. The Spurs led by 12 in the first half, but Denver did battle back in the third quarter. Wemby and Keldon made a huge play defensively on one of the final possessions for the Nuggets. Nikola Jokic was trying to post Wemby toward the left side of the mid-range area, and Keldon applied some double team pressure with Wemby, and they did a good job of forcing Jokic into a bad pass. He ends up throwing it to Vassell. Vassell intercepts it and takes it down court for a dunk, and the Spurs end up holding on for that 3-point win. And what this did, the reason why this is a significant win for the Spurs is that they had lost their previous 3 crunch time games on the road. They had lost at Minnesota, against the Knicks, and against the Sixers. Those were all crunch time games where they were really falling apart in those final 5 minutes. They just couldn't come up with stops or make shots. And so in this game, they actually got a road win here on the road in Denver by beating the Nuggets there in crunch time. Wemby has a spectacular double-double with 35 points and 18 rebounds. Devin Vassell comes up with 18 points for the Spurs. Keldon Johnson chips in 16 points off the bench, and then Julian Champagnie also had 15 points there for the Spurs on Friday. Then on Saturday, the Spurs are playing the Denver Nuggets, but now the venue moves to San Antonio, so both teams travel from Denver to San Antonio. The Nuggets, again, are favored by 3, but they were still without Aaron Gordon, and the Spurs did welcome Jeremy Sohan back. This game was a thriller where the Nuggets end up winning by 11 in overtime. Basically, the Spurs did lead by 11 going into the fourth quarter, so it looked like they were probably going to win this game. But then they went cold in the fourth quarter. They just couldn't make shots. They started turning the ball over. Denver had Jokic going and Michael Porter Jr. in the fourth, and so the Nuggets did force overtime. And then in overtime, the Spurs even went more frigid in that final 5 minutes, where basically no one could make a shot. The only made basket was a Devin Vassell dunk, and then one free throw in that overtime period, where the Nuggets outscored the Spurs 14-3. Led by Jokic, who had 9 points and 5 rebounds in those final 5 minutes. Jokic ends up with 46 points in the night. And so Denver did win in overtime 14-3, and they ended up holding on for the win there. Wemby had a big double double game on his birthday. It was his 21st birthday, but he didn't get what he wished for. Friday night, Wemby had said that all he wanted for his birthday was to get a win on Saturday, and the Spurs unfortunately couldn't come up with the win. Wemby still had a spectacular game though, with 20 points and a career high 23 rebounds for a 2020 double-double. Harrison Barnes had a big night with 22 points, but his last basket did come in the third quarter. He like all his teammates went cold in the fourth and overtime, and then Devin Vassell didn't have an efficient shooting game, 19 points on 20 shots, but he was more aggressive about trying to attack the Nuggets' interior defense, trying to get Jokic switched on him. And so he ended up with 12 points in that dunk layup range for his 19 points. So overall, Vegas did say the Spurs should have gone 2-5 in these last 7 games. This is a tough slate of games for them, and they actually defied those expectations by going 3-4. So again, even though it wasn't a winning record in these last 7 games, they were very difficult opponents and the circumstances on the road, and so the Spurs still did better than they were supposed to do by going 3-4. So next, I want to talk about how the Spurs are doing through 35 games so far this season. The games that they have completed, they are now 18-17. Overall, for the record, they are 9th out west. I'll talk a little bit more about their play-in chances in another topic in this episode. Offensively, they're still 17th, scoring 111.5 points per 100. Defensively, they have seen an improvement. At one point, they were 19th. Now they've gotten back down to 13th, so just inside the league average at 13th. And then their net rating is 16th at minus 0.5 points per 100. As far as their quarters, they have done a better job of getting out to better starts in some of the games where they are still a minus 8.9 points per 100 in first quarters, which is 25th in the NBA by net rating. But that's actually a progress compared to when they were like a minus 15 in first quarters. They're barely losing second quarters. They're a minus 2.2 there. They're still being really good in third quarters, a plus 11.1 there. And then fourth quarters, they're barely losing these quarters as well. At one point, they actually were winning fourth quarters, but now they're losing them again at minus 1.4. But again, overall, they're basically competitive in 2 of the quarters. They're winning the third by a lot, and then the first is still an issue for them, but they're getting better in that department with the first quarter. As far as they're playing crunch time, they are now 9-7 after that loss to Denver in overtime, and so that still puts them 8th. So a top 10 crunch time team. They're doing a good job there of still winning those crunch time games, holding a record above 500, and then they're still taking care of business. What I mean by that is that whenever they have the weaker opponent, on paper, they are 11-2 as favorites this season. They've only lost 2 games when they're favored, and then also they are 17-5 when leading by double digits. So anytime they can build a double digit lead, that's been in about 60% of their games, they're really doing a good job of taking control and keeping that lead. Unfortunately for them, this is a bad example because Denver did come back from a 12-point deficit against San Antonio. But overall, when you look at the full 22 games there, they are 17-5 when leading by double digits. All right, now I want to go through some news and notes that I missed, since the last episode. So first, back on December 23rd, Wemby was named the Western Conference Player of the Week. And then at the end of December, the NBA announced their awards for the monthly winners. And though no Spurs players won, Wemby had his name in a few of these awards, and so did Stephon Castle. So as far as West Player of the Month, Wemby was again a nominee. He was a nominee in October, November, and then he was a nominee again in December. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of OKC, who is a favorite for the MVP right now, he won both awards so far this season. And just the fact that Victor's name is, up there in the getting the nominations for Player of the Month does show how much his stature in the league is really improving. Where some writers now, when they're producing their pieces about MVP winners potentially, they do have Wemby in that conversation as a top 5 MVP candidate. And right now, Vegas too sees Wemby as he has the 5th best odds to win the MVP right now. Again, Shai is one of the favorites, along with Giannis, along with Jokic, those kind of players. But Wemby's definitely up there, and that's good for Victor that his name's in these conversations, because this is going to lead most likely to, a good chance of making the All-Star team, and then also making one of the All-NBA teams, whether that's first, second, or third team. So again, that's one of the good cases for Wemby in terms of him having his name in those conversations with some of those top tier players in the league. As far as the Defensive Player of the Month award, Wemby didn't win this one in December. That went to Jaren Jackson Jr. of the Memphis Grizzlies for the West. If we recall, Victor did win this award in November, December. And one thing I want to say is that, Victor's still leading the league in blocks. Teams are still scared to go inside against him. The on-off splits are really ridiculous for him when he's out on the floor. But I do want to monitor the Spurs' defensive rating, because like I said, they are 13th. They did slip a little bit. They were early in the season they were in the top 10. Now they've kind of slipped there to 13th. And the reason why I note that is because part of the NBA saying the criteria saying that Jaren Jackson Jr. won the award over Wemby for December was that the Grizzlies were a top 5 team defensively in defensive rating. And so if we look at the Grizz right now, they are 5th right now in defensive rating. And so again, that was one of the big arguments last year was, Wemby had all these crazy stats and you could just tell by the eye test and the on-off splits, but Rudy Gobert ended up winning the award because you could just easily argue, oh, well, the Spurs had a bottom 10 defense and the Wolves had a top 10 defense. And this year the Spurs have definitely improved. Like I said, they're 13th right now, but it just makes Wemby's case even stronger if the Spurs can finish the year out as a top 10 defense, because even though he's still the odds-on favorite to win the award, to win Defensive Player of the Year, he's got the best odds there. Jaren Jackson Jr. is right behind him at second. So again, that's just something to monitor. Again, I think Wemby's still the clear favorite to win the Defensive Player of the Award just by what we see on the eye test, what he's doing every night. We see the stats as well. But again, just if you really want to just lock this thing up, the Spurs need to help him as a team and trying to get back to being a top 10 defense. The rookie Stephon Castle has also seen his name twice now in the Rookie of the Month award nominee list. So Castle was a nominee for the Western Conference Player of the Rookie of the Month back in October, November. Jalen Wells of the Grizzlies won that award that month. And then in December, Castle was again a nominee, but Yevis Missy of the Pelicans won the award for the rookies out west. And Castle, as I'm going to talk about a little bit, now that everyone's healthy, he has started to see his minutes really get cut. So it's going to be a little bit tougher for him to be in those conversations for rookie of the year. I mean, maybe being in the conversations, yes, but as far as winning it, it's getting a little bit harder for him just because of where his place is at in the team right now with his minutes getting slashed. And then he's currently 5th in Rookie of the Year odds according to Vegas. And then one last note I want to mention is that the NBA, I am recording this episode on Sunday, January 5th, which means that on February 6th, about a month from now, it's going to be the NBA trade deadline. I will say, as far as the Spurs, there haven't been a lot of rumors involving them. The only one that where their name continues to appear is that De'Aaron Fox rumor. But again, right now, he hasn't asked out of out of Sacramento. So again, it's just more so like the Spurs are one of those teams involved in those discussions. And in the event that Fox does, ask out of Sacramento right now, it looks like the Kings don't want to trade him where everything stands, despite them firing their head coach and having a below 500 record. But again, just right now, just in terms of trade rumors, the only name the Spurs have been linked to is De'Aaron Fox. We'll see if their name starts to pick up here in other rumors with the NBA trade deadline coming in the next month. Let's keep going. All right. So for the big topic of this episode, there's going to be two of them. The first one is I want to talk about the rotation when healthy, because now we have a pretty good 9-game sample size of seeing the Spurs lineup when they're fully healthy. I do want to note that Jeremy Sohan did have to miss one game, basically a game and a half with that back injury, but he's now back in the lineup as well. So let's just talk about where the Spurs are since getting fully healthy back on December 19th in that game against the Atlanta Hawks when they changed some of the lineups and things like that. So, they're 5-4 in these games so far, and let's just review their games. The 5-4 record right now. They have 2 close wins, one overtime win over Atlanta, a good team, a winning ball club right now, and Denver. They won on the road in Denver, of course, a top 4 Western Conference team, and then they got a comfortable win on the road against Brooklyn, and then they had 2 blowouts against teams they were supposed to beat on paper, the Portland Trailblazers and then the Los Angeles Clippers again. So those are their 5 wins so far, being fully healthy. Aside from that one game without Sohan. Their close losses, though, were on the road to the Sixers, the Knicks, the Wolves, again, all on the road. And again, they had a chance to win all of those games. And then that close game where they lost in overtime to the Nuggets in San Antonio. So again, definitely not getting blown out anymore, not getting to these huge holes against some of these teams. So again, with the full healthy roster, they have looked a lot better going 5-4 in these last 9 games. They have changed their starting lineup since this period back on December 19th, where the Spurs are now starting the lineup we assumed would start, before Devin Vassell was known to be coming into the season with an injury. So that lineup is Chris Paul, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, and Victor Wembanyama when they're fully healthy. And so far now, through 238 possessions, according to Cleaning the Glass, this lineup is looking pretty good on paper with the numbers wise. They are now a plus 18.1 points per 100, which is the 81st percentile. They're in the 63rd percentile offensively and 89th percentile defensively, so showing good numbers on both ends of the floor. And those numbers are similar to their other lineup that was pretty good at a plus 18.6 points per 100, and that was Chris Paul, Stephon Castle, Julian Champagnie, Harrison Barnes, and Wemby. So again, again, numbers wise, the data is showing that this is being a good lineup according to what we see from the numbers. The bench unit then has been a little bit of a mixture here of different rotations. So here's what I mean: the first four players have been consistent. It's been Trey Jones, Stephon Castle, Julian Champagnie, and Keldon Johnson. Those four players are always playing in games when the team's fully healthy. It's more so the concerning part for the Spurs in their rotation is they're trying to figure out their backup five spot. So early on, when they got fully healthy, Charles Bassey had earned the backup 5 minutes behind Wemby. Then they started, they weren't really liking that lineup after a few games. And so then they started going to small ball with having either Sohan play some backup five and then also Victor playing some backup five as well. And then lately in the last two games, especially against Denver, we have seen Zach Collins now get his job back as being the backup center to Wemby. But even he had some trouble in that. He did okay in that first game at Denver, but then he had a lot of trouble in that second game against Denver, and even Charles Bassey got some minutes there against the Nuggets. So again, the big question mark with the rotations, everyone has kind of their spots already in the starting lineup and the backup lineups. It's more so that backup five role. And so regarding those four bench players that I mentioned, Jones, Castle, Champagnie, and Keldon, those four players have been in lineups for 121 possessions according to Cleaning the Glass. That's in the 79. They're a plus 6.7 points per 100, so 79th percentile. So again, pretty good lineup when the four players are on the floor. Offensively, they're doing pretty good job. Actually, no, that's where they have their troubles. I'm sorry. So offensively, they're in the 32nd percentile of scoring, but then defensively is where they're still holding up 96th percentile. It's a very small sample size, I will say, but when they have Wemby as the backup five, of course, they're really good. When they have Charles Bassey as the backup five, the numbers do show they're pretty good. But again, there's got to be a reason why the coaching staff doesn't like having Bassey there, because he hasn't kept that role. And then the numbers don't look so good when it's Collins at the backup five or Jeremy Sohan. So again, that's when the data looks pretty rough. But again, it is a small sample size. So again, that's kind of where their rotations kind of sit right now with the Spurs being fully healthy through 9 games, aside from one game without Jeremy Sohan. Now, I've kind of looked at some of the stats. Now we're going to talk about more so the players individually. Kind of just look at some outliers that I'm kind of watching right now from looking at their stats from the entire season to these last 9 games for some of these players. So. Wemby has definitely gone up a level. I mean, you just see his stats popping off the page in all sorts of categories, and of course that's why he was known as a defensive player of the month nominee. Where his scoring's gone up to 31 points in these last 9 games. He's shooting 39% from 3. He's getting to the free throw line more often. 5.7 free throw attempts, 12 rebounds, 4 assists, 5 blocks. I mean, yes, Victor's numbers are just popping off the page here since the team got fully healthy. Devin Vassell, he's still scoring about 15 points a game during these 2 time frames, but his 3-point accuracy has really taken a hit here, where he was shooting for the season. He's shooting 35% from 3, but in these last 9 games, he's really struggling to find a 3 ball, making just 29% of his threes. So that, again, he's out there, he took the place of Champagnie basically, and Julian's definitely been a lights out shooter. And so, of course, Vassell's known to be a good 3-point shooter. So again, we'll see, how long that takes for him to kind of get back to his usual shooting percentage. Stephon Castle has seen a slip in his scoring, but that's also due to his minutes limitations now, where his scoring for the season's gone from 10.9 points per game to now 8.6. And like I said, you really see his minutes getting slashed lately since the team's got fully healthy, where for the season, he's playing about 25 minutes a night, but then in these last 9 games, he's only averaging 18 minutes a game, so he's losing about 6 minutes. And one thing I've definitely seen, and I think you've seen it as well if you've been watching the games, is that there's less room for error for him. Whereas if he makes a few turnovers in a row, he may not see the floor much else throughout the rest of the game. Whereas earlier in the season, when the Spurs were without Vassell or had a bunch of injuries they were dealing with, Castle could make some mistakes on either end of the floor, and then still have a chance to kind of figure it out and impact the game still and stay on the floor. But now with everyone healthy, if it's not a good start for him, the coaching staff isn't really giving him a lot of opportunity to play anymore, especially in fourth quarters. There's been a few fourth quarters in the last month where he hasn't played at all, or he's barely played, and then he hasn't played at all anymore in the Spurs' crunch time games, despite them being 6-2 with him in 8 crunch time games this season. He hasn't really been on the floor at all in crunch time. So again, now now he's getting more so those rookie expectations, where if he makes a mistake, especially it's more so on the offensive end. Defensively, he's still really good when he's out there on the floor, but offensively, if he has a few turnovers in a row or takes some bad shots, the coaching staff isn't putting him back in games for much longer in second half. So again, Castle's more so a player to watch. And then, like I said earlier, there's really no answer right now at the front court. like I said, they've kind of just been shifting bigs, going from Bassi to Sohan and Wemby to now Collins. And again, Sohan and Wemby are going to play a lot of minutes, so you don't want to, you don't want to put this much pressure on them to have to play the backup 5 minutes as well. So it is going to be interesting, as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, if the Spurs are starting to explore the trade market for maybe a backup center option, although it's tough, as I'm going to mention a little bit, to move Collins' contract because he's the fourth side played player, but he also hasn't, that he's not meeting up the expectations of his contract with the production that he's bringing out on the floor. All right, the next topic I want to talk about is how the Spurs are so far, again, through 35 games, defying expectations. They are actually playing a lot better than expected. I believe, before the season started, they were expected to kind of be in that mixture of teams of like Portland and Utah, be better than those teams, but not quite be, right there at the playoffs play-in scenario. They're supposed to be right under that, like 13th, like 12th or 13th out west. But they have definitely played better basketball than expected on paper so far. And so let's just talk about where they're at and their path to becoming either a play-in team or a playoff team as they currently sit right now. So like I mentioned earlier, they are ninth right now overall, 18-17. And I do want to say that this is as of Sunday evening, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So again, the standings could change a little bit depending on how Sunday's games go, even though the Spurs are off. They were actually eighth, before that loss to Denver on Saturday. So again, if you can get, if the Spurs can finish within one of those top 6 seeds, they don't even have to go to the play-in tournament. But if they finish 7 through 10, then they still have a chance of getting one of those play-in spots by participating in the play-in tournament. One thing that's going well for them, that's not really their fault, but is that the Kings and the Suns have not been playing up to expectations. The Kings and Suns are both a few games below 500, which gives the Spurs a really good chance of, as long as they can stay 500 or above, they're going to be in that play-in or playoff race. They're keeping themselves in there. And then they're actually not far from a top 4 seed. They're actually just 2.5 games in the standings behind the Denver Nuggets right now as of Sunday. So again, there's a chance where, if they can just kind of tread water and stay around 500, they can stay in that play-in race right now. Or if they can actually be even better and surpass expectations, then they can actually get up to, move up a few places in the standings. So it's really, they have a lot of their own control here in terms of how successful they want to be going forward. When I look at positiveresidual.com, one thing they can do is they kind of show a strength of schedule. One thing to note about the Spurs is that they do still have a very tough schedule left this season. They have the 3rd toughest schedule with an opponent strength of schedule of 53%, according to Positive Residual. But one good thing, despite the Spurs having a tough schedule, is that some of the other Western Conference playoff teams they're battling with also have tough schedules. The Kings have the toughest schedule left in the league. The Grizzlies have the second toughest schedule. I know they're a top 3 team right now. And then also other teams in front of the Spurs, like the Rockets, the Lakers, they are both in top 10 and toughest schedules left. And also the Suns, who are not in the play-in picture right now, also have a top 10 toughest schedule. So again, that's one thing that just the fact that the Spurs are in the Western Conference, just in that conference, they're in a very tough bracket with a bunch of other West playoff teams. But a lot of those other West playoff teams also have tough schedules as well, not just the Spurs. So again, it's going to be interesting to watch here down the stretch. One thing the Spurs are doing a really good job of, as I mentioned, is they are taking care of business, and they need to continue to do this in the games where they get these kind of opponents, where they're 11-2 when favored. They are 17-5 when leading by double digits. And then against below 500 teams, they are 11-5 as well. So again, if they keep doing those things where on paper that they should be favored in these games or beating the teams with below 500 records, they have a good chance to keep these to keep this position of either staying in the play-in race or moving up to a playoff spot. And so some teams that they still have that are left below 500 are they get the Pistons twice. They haven't played Detroit yet. They get the Bulls on Monday night, as I'm going to talk about. They still have one more game against the Brooklyn Nets. They have 2 games against the Toronto Raptors. They have 2 games against the Hornets, and then they have 1 game against the Wizards out east. And then out west, you can say some of these teams are below 500, but some of them, context really matters. Yes, the Blazers, they have one more matchup with Portland. The Pelicans, they're going to have 3 more games against New Orleans, but New Orleans is, even though on paper they are a below 500 team, when they start getting players healthy, they can be a tough opponent to play. The Kings, they have 1 more game against the Kings, and then they have 2 more games against the Suns. And again, the expectations for the Kings and Suns is they were supposed to be playoff teams, but even them, beating those teams is not a walk in the park. It's going to be a challenge for the Spurs. But again, they have a lot of control in terms of how much how successful they want to be moving up in the playoff race, or at least staying in that play-in range, as long as they don't start to let some of these games slip away, and as long as they take care of business in those games where they're on paper expected to win. All right, next I want to talk about some features that are up on the spotupshot.com. So make sure if you have a chance, you check out the spotupshot.com. If you're not on the mailing list, please enter your email so you can join the mailing list. You'll get the new pieces as soon as they are written and published. So one of the feature pieces I wrote this past week was on. I'm going to start looking at some trade candidates. It's called 2025 trade deadline, and the first player I started with was Jonas Valanciunas. Now, some of these players are players that I've kind of looked at and think that maybe they might be a good fits for the Spurs. And so I just look at overall, the player, who they are, provide some tape, look at their contract situation, what rumors are there on these players regarding trades, and then I look at would this player be a good fit for the Spurs, and also what would it take for the Spurs to create a deal for this player, and how likely would that happen or not. And so the first player I did write about, as I mentioned, was Jonas Valanciunas. And so, as far as his contract, he has a really good contract, movable contract. That's why you've seen his name in a lot of trade rumors, with the Lakers really, having their eye on him, the Suns, and wanting to get him. But it'd be tough for Phoenix to get Valanciunas, just because they don't have a lot of draft assets, nor do they have the contracts. And so, just one thing you see is that Valanciunas is really the reason why I think he might be a good fit for the Spurs, if they were to explore looking at him, is that he's going to help with one of those areas where they have some trouble, which is in the opponent offensive rebounding. Some games they really have a tough time with second chance points from the opponent. And though Valanciunas isn't going to help your defense overall, he's going to help in that way, in terms of having a lot of size there. He can spell Wemby for some minutes and really just being a force there in the paint. In terms of getting rebounds, he's only playing like 20 minutes a night. He's already coming off the bench with the Wizards, and so he's kind of used to that role. Offensively, he would bring some different dynamics as well. But again, I think that as far as the defensive glass, this is where he would help. And also, he would just give the Spurs an answer for that front court question that they're obviously dealing with, because obviously they haven't kept Collins as the backup five, nor Charles Bassey. They've had to go to Wemby and Sohan at different points. And so I think that Valanciunas would be a good candidate. But as I wrote in that article, it's for the Spurs, how much do they want to secure that front court position, or just continue playing out the season? Basically, like, do they want to have to include some of their first round picks? Because according to the reporting, Valanciunas is available for second round picks, which the Spurs do have, but the Spurs probably don't want to, move a first round pick or two just to get a player who's going to kind of barely help on the margins, not really have a huge impact on the team. And so that's where it's a little bit tougher. And as I wrote, Zach's contract could be included at $16.7 million, but the fact that he still has $18 million next year, the Wizards have more leverage there in terms of asking for either a first round pick or how many second round picks. So again, that's just a conversation I kind of looked at. The next player I will be writing about for this trade deadline candidates is Cam Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets. I also wrote about Wemby's month of December, and what I did here was I looked at some of the numbers, which were definitely off the page in December for Wemby, in points, blocks, all different areas, rebounds, all different things that he did. But I also looked at his shot selection and how it kind of changed. We did see in December, he got more balanced scoring effort, where yes, he's still taking a lot of threes. Almost 47% of his shots came from three in December, but he did start to get to the line a lot more in December, as well as starting to get more paint looks. So again, it just shows that Wemby's adding a more balanced variety to his scoring attack, and not just solely being a 3-point shooter like we saw early on in the first month, where he over half his shots were coming from three. So that's one piece I wrote over on the spotupshot.com. And then lastly, I also wrote a feature on Wemby's lob throwing ability, where we've seen him connect with Jeremy Sohan on lobs, Stephon Castle, Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, all different players finishing dunks from Wemby. And the player that he most frequently targets in those lobs, and they have good chemistry, is Jeremy Sohan. So again, I have some tape on there. I had some data on how many lobs that Wemby has completed and incompleted so far to his teammates in that piece. So definitely check that out over on the spotupshot.com. All right, so before I close this episode out, I want to look at the Spurs' next 3 games before I record my next episode on Sunday, January 12th. So they are only going to play 3 games this week before the next episode comes up. So they do have 3 road games. They're going to be, as I mentioned, on the road at Chicago on Monday. I do think that the Spurs will win this game, or I'm predicting them to win this game. Then Wednesday, they have a tough matchup. They're on the road at Milwaukee. Just because the Bucks are a better team on paper, I'm gonna go with Milwaukee here. And then on Saturday, they are going to the West Coast to LA to play the Lakers. They are on the road at LA. And again, when I looked at my my prediction piece from before the season, I did have the Spurs losing this game, but then winning the next week's game, also at the Lakers. So again, I think that they're going to go 1-2. We'll see if they defy my predictions here. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Spot Up Shot. Again, Spot Up Pod, should I say? Make sure that you, if you have a chance, if you'd like to please visit thespotupshot.com. And also, thank you so much for listening again. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening and have a great day.